Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have a wonderful day ahead of you. In today's edition of Everything You Need, I have an enjoyable and interesting one for yourself, which shall include the biggest talking point of the game week so far, that being captaincy, and that too in some depth. Not just that we shall have in depth, but also the assistant manager, and not just for game week 36, but all the way up to game week 38 as well. And to accompany, we have its fellow friends in form of the free hit, the bench boost, and the triple captain as well. We should also be taking a look at whether we should be buying certain players, including Matheus Cunha and Kevin Schade. But not only that, whether we should be selling some players. Now, we touch on Morgan Rogers and some of the Palace boys, but in particular, the FPL GOAT, Mohamed Salah, whether or not we should be selling him. I'm sure that shall make for an interesting discussion at the minimum. If that sounds great, then do drop a like on the video if you enjoy at any point, or now if you would like to help out the channel, and equally subscribe if you have not already, whether you are an older viewer or a newer viewer. And I do not mean that in terms of age, but rather how long you've been watching the channel. I'm sure the good karma will follow in suit. And without anything else needing to be said, let's hop into it. I shall start with captaincy. And as has been standard practice for a little while, let's name the contenders. And they are Bryan and Mbeumo, Yoanne, Wissa, Kevin De Bruyne, Omar, Marmoush, and Christopher Wood. Now, my viewpoint isn't generous to all, but rather to one particular player, as it says in the second paragraph on the side, and you'll see who that player is in due course. But spoiler alert, it is not Christopher Wood. And he's very interesting. He is very, very, very interesting, because on one hand, it's a very good fixture for him, right? With all due respect to Leicester, they've been poor this season. They are a poor side relative to the other teams in the Premier League, especially to a Nottingham Forest, who on the most part have been very, very, very good this season. I think the fact that it's a must-win game, and the fact that they may not start as sharp as they would like, will cause a slight difference to how they approach the game compared to what they do usually. I think usually they're more willing to be reliant on their counter-attacks and transitions and their quality in those two areas in particular, and they're willing to let the game go a little bit deeper and not force the issue earlier. And this is something I spoke about earlier in the season. I spoke about how against Forest, you almost need to be willing to play their game. This is when they were on like their really good run, which was honestly for most of the season. And I said you had to be willing to play their game. You have to almost be willing to go all the way at 0-0, at 1-1, like in a really settled game state, and not accept the risk that they want you to accept, almost by you taking onus of the possession and just the way in which the game is going. But in this type of game where they're required to dominate the ball and they really must win it, I do think that you'll see a greater volume of like aggressive attacking patterns of play. And I think for Chris Wood in particular, this could work out quite well for him, and he could just accumulate some more chances. And also, I think this is just what he needs at the moment, because at the moment, it just seems like the ball's evading in ways that it wasn't doing so earlier in the season. Earlier in the season, one shot, one goal, one chance, one goal, always in the right position at the right time. Whereas now, it doesn't seem like that is the case as much. So I think just having more attacking volume of these patterns, even like just chances in general, that they'll be able to create from a different mental philosophy, I think will be really good for him. And overall, like, really good player against not a particularly good team relative to the Premier League. And I think that's enough, especially with penalties. I think that's enough to make it a justifiable captaincy. On the other hand, like, things aren't going right for them, right? And when it's going against you, as we've discussed, it can be very difficult to generate results and thus FPL points. And I think the most wonderful example that I can give you is Cole Palmer. I tweeted about, and I spoke about on this channel, how he appeared to have a black cloud over his head for quite a while when it comes to output-related actions, just output in general, right? And now he gets his 10-pointer against Liverpool. He plays sensationally against Liverpool, and all of a sudden, he looks like such a good option. But imagine throughout that period, if you were trying to time the bottom, and imagine how many times you would have failed. This is a common concept for those involved in investing or trading or just stock market in any form of crypto. And it's very difficult to time the bottom. So I guess you are kind of betting here that Forest's downswing is ending here. And I would be a little bit cautious of that and just maybe not be overly bullish as a result. You can have a positive view. I just think it has to be slightly measured, given they've been in some bad form for a while. And the other thing is Leicester are coming off quite a convincing win against Southampton. But I went and watched some footage back. I was surprised at how one-sided the game was. I think after 10, 20-ish minutes, it was very much one-sided. And that wasn't what I was expecting, to be honest, from Leicester Southampton, because I think as of late, Leicester had been worse than Southampton. And yet they still get the victory, right? So That's something to consider. But like I said in the initial paragraph, I think he's good. I think he's a solid option if you to go there. Perfectly okay and justifiable. I would say medium floor, medium ceiling, right? Like medium ceiling of around 13, maybe 16 and a push for this type of game. Medium floor as well, because of the form they're in, he's not necessarily going to return / score. And it's just whether or not you're that type of manager / you like view the prospects in the same way as me for all the players. Because maybe if you view them in the same way that I do for all the players, you actually would be inclined to go here and you're happy to accept this medium floor / medium ceiling. I would just ask yourself that question. I do think there is a better opportunity and better opportunities elsewhere. As stated on the slide there, the current view on Manchester City captaincy is scattered, and that is very interesting in itself, because if at any point in the season earlier on you told someone that Manchester City were rocking up to St Mary's in a close to must-win game, in good form, where things are going for them, and Southampton just look completely defeated, they're already relegated, and they just don't look very good, do they? You would assume that the choice of captaincy would very much reside with the Mancunians, but I don't think it does. Like, I think there's quite a lot of popularity surrounding Chris Wood and the Brentford boys that we shall come to. Well, and there's quite an even split, or at a bare minimum, there is a split, right? And that's really interesting for all the reasons we discussed. Now, there are two players in particular to look at. And Erling Haaland isn't featured in this video at all. There is not a word written about him on the slides. I will bring him up very briefly, and we can address this in solving your problems in a little bit more depth, should we get an update on him from Pep Guardiola. But my answer to him is really just no, because he hasn't played a single minute. You really want to reintegrate him from the off at a higher risk of reoccurrence in terms of the injury. I think not, especially when like you're good enough to beat Southampton anyway. You really don't need to take the risk. And the Club World Cup exists. And with the way that the fixtures fall, Newcastle still have to play Chelsea. Chelsea still have to play Nottingham Forest on the final day. Aston Villa have some tough games, including going away to Bournemouth. If you get this win, you should be like okay enough, right? And I don't think you really need him. So I personally don't think it's too much of a factor, Erling Haaland. But we will see what Pep says in solving your problem, because if he is going to get minutes, that does change things. So let's start with my favourite out of the two, and that is Kevin De Bruyne. And he seems to be the people's favourite out of the two, at least as well. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what role he'll play in this game. I wonder if he's going to have that role where he pulls into these wider zones that I've seen against Wolves, that I've seen against Everton at times. I wonder if he's going to come deeper to receive, which again I've seen in those two games at time, or because of the opposition, Pep's more willing to trust Manchester City as a whole in build-up and to bypass Southampton's press and play through them in a fashion which is just better, but also at a higher frequency, and therefore you can get De Bruyne receiving in higher areas of the pitch, in more dangerous areas of the pitch, and when you do, then you can really, really hurt Southampton on a repeated basis, right? So it's interesting to see what dynamic we get there. Will he change the system entirely, right? Forget Kevin De Bruyne's role, but he's been utilizing the fullbacks to generate the width, and then having like almost inside forwards with Marmoush straying to the left-hand side, De Bruyne maybe in the middle, and then someone operating from the right. Will he go to a more traditional system that is used for pretty much all his years throughout coaching, whereby the width is held by genuine wingers, and then like he inverts one of the fullbacks or just has them a little bit more narrow compared to what he has been doing? And in that case, how does De Bruyne's role get affected? Do we see Marmoush as a more traditional 9? I think Pep really prefers to have him as a shadow striker, a second striker would be the most accurate term, in my opinion, so that he can function as that runner as opposed to that more hold-up type of 9, which we saw against Leicester for the 2-0 victory, right? And then where does De Bruyne play there? Does he play more as an 8? Does he play more as a 10? I actually think that system could even be a bit better than for him if Pep's not to use him in a higher position in his 1 now, because I do think he could play in a 10. So that's something to consider as well. And what are his expected minutes like? Look, they've got this game, and then on the 17th, they've got the FA Cup final. On the 20th, they've got Bournemouth at home, and Bournemouth at home, rested Bournemouth. I'll prove for a pretty intense game. And who knows, maybe that game is really important. Maybe that's the one where they finally wrap it up, given how results go this game week. And all of a sudden, he'll have the FA Cup on his mind, and he'll have the fact on his mind that he would like his players really well rested for that game, so that they can also play the Bournemouth one. Now, there is a good gap between the game on Saturday and game on the 17th for the FA Cup. So maybe he thinks that's enough. But again, it's just something to consider, because De Bruyne has had a fair few minutes recently as well. right? So those are all things with De Bruyne. What I would say overall is that I quite like it. I'm not in love with it, but I quite like it. I personally don't think he was good against me. And I knew that it wouldn't be overly well received, hence because he got an 11-pointer. So I didn't discuss it I didn't tweet about it. But having watched the performance, I thought he was not particularly impactful at all. Even though it's Southampton, I would just be a little bit careful because I'm not sure that like the hype is necessarily warranting from the performances that we've seen. And then Marmoush's expected minutes is the first question. I think they're pretty good, as we discussed the dynamic with Erling Haaland earlier. And if you're confident in them, surely he should be able to return in this type of game. As it says on the slide, it's subtly implied in people's preferences for captaincy currently and kind of just how they talk about Marmoush, but for some reason it just seems uninspiring. It just doesn't appear to be right. However, from a more logical, analytical perspective, if you are to take the analytical mind, then I do think it makes a lot of sense because he should get better expected minutes than most of the City attackers, if not all of them. And he is well situated to profit from Pep's system and the quality Manchester City have. He'll probably have penalties as well, I think, unless they give it to De Bruyne as like a bye-bye type of thing. But I think he'll have them as well. And I know for quite a few people, that's the big factor. So I think Marmoush is probably a little bit underrated. I like De Bruyne. I'm just not like in love with it just because I don't think he's been like unbelievable as of late compared to what the general consensus is. Now, at the start of the captaincy section, I told you that there was one player in particular that I liked, and he had pretty much all of my attention. That is Mr. Bryan Mbeumo. For the reasons that are stated on the slide, and there's just so many routes to points, crosses from different angles and different distances. Now, in the Kevin Schade section, I will talk about Brentford's uses of crosses, and in particular, the ones to the back post, as I've taken a little bit of analysis from X, which I thought was really good, and I shall share. But when he's in those really wide areas, he still has the like general level of ball striking ability to cross the ball in a particular fashion, which is dangerous. When he's like situated closer to the corner of the box, he can still whip those crosses in, right? So he's got in his arsenal like the crosses from all different angles and distances. Good, great route to points. Got the shots from different angles and distances, and he's got this to an even greater extent than he does the crosses, right? Because naturally you're not going to cross the ball from the box, but you can shoot from outside the box, you can shoot in the box, you can shoot from like more the center circle type of range, if you wanted to call it that, from the right hand side. Of course, he can go across the keeper, he can finesse it, etc., right? He can go near post, and with the ball striking, he's just got a lot of routes to points through his shots, right? Because his shots are just really good. That's one of the reasons why he's such a good player. Then his team's game model as well, very aggressive. I'd say far more attacking orientated than defensive, for example, with Nottingham Forest. Now you look at how they're more willing to sit in and score goals in transition on counter-attacks. And it's maybe one reason why they don't score as many goals as Brentford, and one reason why most teams don't score as many goals as Brentford, or if any of them, right? Because of how well coached they are and the philosophy behind Thomas Frank's system. Then the volume of opportunities to return just in general as a combination of how good he is and what Brentford exhibit in terms of their system. Then also the context of the game. Now, it's interesting because they haven't ever been in Europe, Brentford, right? And they don't have a squad that are full of serial winners. If anything, a lot of the guys are like young and up and coming. Just think about Mbeumo. Like, he's not even particularly old. I think he's like 24-ish, right? Thomas Frank's a very young coach as well compared to some of the other ones. And whilst they are absolutely brilliant, they're not serial winners because they just haven't been in the place to go and win at that time. So it's interesting that they're reacting so well to this type of pressure of chasing European football. And I think like that will continue. I think they'll continue to do well, at least for this game. And then also his probable departure, right, which Christian Norgard spoke about. And I think he'll want to sign off in a certain fashion and give back to the fans. And they've given him so much love. And he's obviously given them so much, but I'm sure there's that aspect to it. Positionally, it's interesting because I think about the game, particularly when they had Leicester at home, and I don't think he returned. I think he should have got an assist. And we saw like at times a 44, at times a 3-1-6 from Brentford, but it had him wider than you would like, and it had like Schade and Wissa functioning as dual strikers in the middle. And also because Ipswich are prone to conceding from cutbacks, and the fact that he isn't so much of an arriver as someone like Kevin Schade or Yoanne Wissa in the box. So that's something to consider about maybe it's not so optimal for him. But overall, I think for all of the reasons discussed, all the obvious things as well, high ceiling, high floor, and it's just a very, very good fixture. I did go and watch some of Ipswich, Everton, and I thought they were okay, but I think they were there enough for the taking, whereby if you were to put Brentford in the Everton situation, Brentford would have scored a few more and just made a few more as well. But we should also give some light to his best mate, it appears, on the pitch at least, and that is Yoanne Wissa. And I've loved watching him play at times this season. I remember yesterday or earlier today, I caught myself thinking about his performance in the first half at Bournemouth when I was thinking about FPL as well. Like, it was so impressive and I loved watching it. It's a really, really good centre forward performance. However, overall, I just trust Mbeumo a little bit more. I think better player in terms of quality overall, and you've always kind of got to factor that in. Penalties, routes to points, I'd say he's got more. He's also got set pieces, which I didn't talk about, and just I spoke about penalties now. And then also the big thing, forward versus midfield aspect, right? If Mbeumo's going to bag a brace, and then Wissa's going to bag a brace, and Brentford to keep a clean sheet, Wissa's already down 3 points, which is basically an assist. So there's that factor as well. But for me, it's very, very, very likely to be a Bryan Mbeumo captaincy, and I do think he's the best option. From Bryan Mbeumo to Yoanne Wissa to the third amigo, Kevin Schade. When you think of assets in general, you often think about their positions very early on when assessing them, right? So, for example, you will think about Bryan Mbeumo, and then if the opposition left back was known for being really, really, really bad, you think, oh, right wing versus left back, right? So you think about position a lot, even if it's subconscious. Case. But with Schade, I think he is interpreted slightly differently to how he should be. When you think of Schade, you think left winger. I think everyone pretty much thinks that. But in the way in which he's utilized and has been utilized against the lower ranked teams, if you would like to phrase it like that, he's more of a shadow striker, a dual striker with Yoanne Wissa, and an inside forward. Whichever one of those terms I think would suit adequately. And if you were to perceive him like that, a midfielder in good form, who's improved a lot, who we'll come on to, under Thomas Frank, in this particularly attacking, aggressive game model, with a good fixture, all of a sudden, and cheap, I think he becomes so much more of an attractive option. And I also think that's far more accurate in terms of the description of him. And as I say there, it was Leicester away where I was like, oh, this guy's really improved. I remember watching him before. I think he's a bit raw, right? And I wondered, have it, and the quality was certainly there, but I said, it's raw. But he's been refined, and I think Brentford have done a great job with him, and now I think it's quite realistic to see him haul. He's in good form. He is in very good form. Got a very good fixture, and there is, of course, what is mentioned above. I don't love the fixture after Ipswich, however. I think people have looked at this set of 4 fixtures, Man United at home, Ipswich away, and the other two, and kind of grouped them together. But in reality, I think it's Man United at home, Ipswich away, and then separately, it's Fulham at home and Wolves away. Fulham at home isn't easy. I remember when Brentford went to Craven Cottage, and they didn't really get too much change in an attacking sense. Obviously, Fulham, we know to be a good side from a defensive standpoint, especially because they're away. I think they shut up a little bit more. And of course, they're chasing Europe as well, right? Just like Brentford are. And then also Wolves. Wolves are flying. Vitor Pereira's done a really good job. I think, honestly, on another day, they take points off Manchester City and potentially beat them last Friday night. So I think it's cool to buy them, but just think about that, because I don't think the fixture coming up, as good as Brentford are from an FPL standpoint, with their attack, I think it's warranting of some consideration. And just in terms of routes to points, something I saw on X was a really good bit of analysis from the account Tax, and make sure you go and follow them. And I quote, crossing, overload, and hit the back post. And what he showcased was numerous, and I mean multiple, I think it was 12 images of Brentford hitting back post crosses, particularly Bryan Mbeumo coming inside and delivering them, but also Keane Lewis Potter. And if Mbeumo is to be putting it on a plate, it's probably going to be for Schade, who is functioning as that left inside forward. And then obviously Mbeumo delivering from the right. So he's going to be the guy arriving at the back post, or at least will be the person best situated to do so. He can do that, and Brentford are going to do that again and again and again. Well, just increases his volume, increases the opportunity, and then increases the probability. I think that's great for you. So that's something to consider for routes to points as well, should you not have picked that up, because I didn't, and I thought it was a very good bit of analysis on X. Now I can promise you that the section on Kevin Schade will be longer than that on Matheus Cunha, because I think it's simpler. I love the asset. I think he can repay you very handsomely for acquiring him. I like the fixtures as well quite a lot, and probably more than most people do. They are Brighton at home, and then they've got Brentford at home on the final day, and away at Palace in 37. Palace, who will just be coming off the FA Cup final. So either I think they'll be rather upset that they didn't win, and you'll see some rotation. The likes of Kamada and Nketiah could probably play in the front three, all a bit more on your profits. And also, because if they win, then I imagine a few of them will be on the booze, and I think you'll see the rotation, but some potentially half-drunk performances as well. And generally, just very bullish on him because he's just a very, very, very good football player. And I've used that so many times to analyze him, and he keeps coming up with the points. Came up with the points on free hit 34 as well. And yeah, in an ideal world, I'm snapping him up. Now, you will see my team selection tomorrow. That is very unlikely I get him because of my route to him. But if I could, I'd snap him up. And I would encourage you to do the same if you are in a position to profit. Most people aren't really talking about going here. I could have included him in the captaincy section. I didn't. It was close. But I don't think Bryan necessarily wants to stop Cunha in its entirety for 90 minutes. Whether he returns is another thing. But just like Manchester City, he could have. Would definitely have more opportunities to do so in this game than he did there. And now we will move on to chip strategy. And I actually considered putting one of my logos next to the title section just to separate it. I should have. Okay, let's start with Game Week 36 and 38 because they are my primary preferences for the usage of the triple captain and free hit in particular. I've spoken about Game Week 38 so many times as an opportunity. Goals, 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 goals. Goals galore. That's what you get in Game Week 38. Every single season, statistically, right? You get more goals. So it just makes sense to use your chips there. Your ceiling, therefore, is not only a little bit higher, but quite a lot higher. And as they say, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that age-old teaching can be loosely applied to this situation as well when you think about it. Moving on to the bench boost, it can, of course, be used in this period, right, of 36 and Game Week 38. It's very much what suits your own team. And if it is optimal for you to use it in that period, and it appears that maybe free hit 37, for example, works better for you, then by all means do it. It just so happens that the fixtures in 37 are a lot closer, whereas, for example, this game week, you've got the opportunity of Southampton versus Manchester City. Good, triple captaincy opportunity, and if you don't have players there, free hit. Similar with Ipswich versus Brentford. I like Cunha for Wolves versus Brighton, which I'm sure you may have guessed. And there are a couple of other decent fixtures and opportunities regardless. Whereas in 37, I think less of them. Maybe Villa and Chelsea are stacked there against the Spurs and United side who will have more than one eye on the Europa League final. But outside of that, there's not so many great games. And this is a loose line of thinking. I do think, however, when you want to play your bench boost, you would like for your team to be in its most refined and optimized state because the whole squad is concerned with generating points. And as such, having more transfers available to yourself simply due to the fact that you've had more game weeks to accumulate them, thereby playing it in 38, could be a decent line of thinking, could be a decent strategy. You could argue that the inverse may apply to the free hit given the way in which you want to use the information over the field. That's that. Now we can move on to a slightly different section where we go from the buy to the sell. And for most of you working in finance, I imagine you'd rather stay on the previous slide, but we've got to visit the sell side at some point, and this time it's a sell side that is quite intimidating, and that is in the form of Mohamed Salah, because it is a topic that has been brought up, and I thought it, therefore, relevant to discuss it, and I also think it's got some merit to it, to be quite honest. Now, firstly and foremost, if you're in a spot where you don't need to sell him, and he doesn't block any of the players you particularly like, or you're on the fence, or you don't feel like you need to take the risk, or you're just quite risk averse, it makes a lot of sense to keep him, right? I'll skip the second paragraph. And you are giving up a high ceiling, a high floor asset. You're also giving up the best player in the league. And he's got 2 games to go after this on paper. Stylistically, Brighton looks like a really good game for him. We've all seen big game Brighton, right? And I've banged on about it on this channel. And they do very well in those big games. So maybe it's not quite as good as it looks like on paper. But I think Palace on the last day, Palace who will almost definitely be on the beach. And Liverpool will probably want to give their fans a nice send-off given they won the league as well. There'll be of a party atmosphere. You don't want to lose the game when you're going to win the league, right? You want to win 4-5-0 and everyone to have a good time, right? And so I think there's that aspect of it as well. I also think that in this particular game week, Liverpool as a side will be in much better condition just because I don't think they'll be drinking as much during the game week. I think the novelty will have slightly worn off. And the fact that it's Arsenal, and the big thing is that it's Arsenal, I think they'll want to get straight back at it and not only put out a statement, but kind of kick Arsenal where it hurts, especially if they get through to the Champions League final, just to put a seed of doubt in their mind. His battle with Miles Lewis-Skelly will be really interesting this game week. I think he gets the better of it for the most part, and maybe even in a way that isn't like so obvious. But I think, like, given how good he is, he'll give him a tough time, and a time he hasn't really been exposed to as much, obviously, because Salah's maybe even the second best right wing in the world. And it sounds crazy to say, but when I watched Lamine Yamal tonight, and I didn't watch much of the game, but when I watched Lamine Yamal tonight, I was genuinely, and I'm digressing here, but I think it's relevant, fair, considering what I watched. I felt like it was magic. I felt like I was a kid watching magic. It was that enjoyable. And football, to be honest, recently has been really boring. And I think Thierry Henry spoke about it on CBS. But the Premier League, especially, following like Liverpool basically wrapping up this title, has been really boring. So to watch something like that and not have to watch 3-2-5 positional play every week and deep block versus this block, and like, let's just transition on sides and leverage physicality, was really, really enjoyable. Right. But anyway, coming back, I expect him to do decently well. But, well, I think he could do decently well. I'm not sure his ceiling is as high as usual, given it's Arsenal. And whether they win or lose, I think they'll be really on it for this game, Arsenal. So I don't love it, I don't hate it. But going back to the counter argument of essentially selling him, I think if he acts as a blocker, I can get on board with it. Because if you're into this type of stuff, the assist record has been notoriously difficult to break, right? People get close and then they almost just, it evades them, right? It really just does. And almost as if like they have a black cloud over their head any time that they get close to it. So if you're into that type of stuff, that's something there. Liverpool's left wing and centre forward have been rather inconsistent. He himself is not in the greatest run of form. Similar to Chris Wood, everything was kind of going his way earlier in the season to a really big degree. But not so much anymore, ever since they basically had the title wrapped, right? He hasn't hauled in like 6-7 game weeks. So those are all things to consider. I think especially because it's Arsenal, okay to sell, on the assumption you're okay with like the dynamic at 37 and 38, and you're really bullish on a particular asset this game, or even just bullish. Now, this section will be the shortest of the lot. I will touch on Rodgers and Crystal Palace assets in terms of selling them, but more so in solving your problems, potentially team selection, but more so solving your problems. I would just like a little bit more time to think about it, because I don't think it's that easy of a decision, for example, which one to prioritize to sell, whether you should even sell, and so on and so on. And you're likely going to have to bench one either way, so you'll have to figure that aspect of it out. So I thought I would bring it up because I'm aware that it's a topic, but I think we'll reserve that for a later time in the week. And then when it comes to hits, I think the fixtures are there for it, right? We've said that 36 as a general fixture set is quite attractive, but given there's only 2 game weeks left, so there's less time for it to pay off, which I'm not like, I don't care about too much, but it is a factor. And given that the assets who are likely to be sold have a decent set of fixtures, conviction. I think you need it. I think you need it in abundance this game week to go there. And if not abundance, you need quite a bit. So yeah, like I said, that would be a short section. Let's finally move on to the assistant manager bit, and we can wrap up. So to conclude, let us look at assistant manager 36 all the way to 38. In 36, even like Guardiola and Thomas Frank aren't particularly inspiring for a couple of reasons. But outside of that, it looks barren. We'll speak about Pep first, right? Away at Southampton makes so much sense, right? You would go there, especially where the table bonus managers they have such a low floor. But the thing with Pep is, a lot of you own Guardiola, De Bruyne, Marmoush. A lot of you own De Bruyne, Marmoush, and Ruben Diaz. A lot of you own Guardiola, Diaz, De Bruyne. A lot of you own Guardiola, Diaz. You already have the triple City, right? And are you really going to take a City asset out as in a game week like this where transfers are so precious, given how like most of us just don't have many, to bring in Guardiola, especially when he's not got the ceiling of a table bonus manager? Probably not. So it's actually quite unrealistic that you'll go there unless you have double City. And if you have got double City, I think it's an easy choice. I put Thomas Frank in brackets because I think where you're not going for a table bonus manager, the floor should be really high to almost guarantee you a certain amount of points. And I think just because like Brentford aren't Manchester City and Ipswich aren't Southampton, and it's away, got to be a little bit cautious of the fact that this isn't a slam dunk. I just don't think you can trust them as much. There's also the clean sheet aspect to consider. I think Guardiola's side are far more likely to keep one than Thomas Frank. So there's that to it. But look, if you don't have Triple City, I think Guardiola. Yes, if not, you just go Thomas Frank and hope that they get the job done. Look, they score a lot of goals, right? So maybe they'll make up for the clean sheet through like a 4-1 win. And you walk away with 10 points, which isn't the worst thing in the world. But then from there, we go back to our roots. We go back to selecting table bonus. Game week 37. At the moment, if I had to choose, I'm going Graham Potter at home to a Nottingham Forest side that potentially aren't in the greatest form. And I think Forest is back three against them could prove a little bit challenging for them because they don't really have the weapons to break down like deeper blocks. And West Ham's deeper block when they operate with a back three really isn't that bad. You just have to look at the game away at Arsenal. And yes, I am going to keep bringing that up because I love that moment. So that's that. I wish they just played it more, even against the worst side. It would make them harder to beat. But that isn't my... Well, that's just not particularly relevant at the moment. And if not, Fabian Hertzler, just for the reasons I discussed earlier, like big game Brighton, in probably a must-win game for them. Maybe Liverpool will be on the beach. You don't know how they'll be at that time. And if so, yeah, maybe a decent shout to go for Fabian Hertzler. If it wasn't for that Gomez miss, he would have had like a 20-pointer against Newcastle. All right. So let's see how things unfold in 37, but that is a plan for you. And then finally, I think Marco Silva, depending on where City are at, let's say everything's wrapped up. Remember the Liverpool game? Everything's wrapped up for Liverpool, pretty much. And they were a bit off it, and Fulham punished them. Well, Fulham at home have the quality to do so. Probably want to give their fans a send-off, and so on and so on, right? Vitor Pereira, I think he's got table bonus against Bryan at home. Oh, I fancy that. After how good he's been, I think there'll be such a good feel-good factor on that day. Cunha's probably last at the club, probably want to sign off, and so on and so on. So I really like that. Arteta, because Southampton away, you want to go for non-table bonus slam dunk. That's the closest you're going to get. And then maybe Ruben Amorim and Ange Postecoglou, just because the Europa League final will be done by that point, and maybe the dynamic will be slightly different. They're not the worst set of games to pick up table bonus. So I think that could be quite interesting as well. Villa, for example, I feel like have that. At the moment, I'd say this Villa side have that gene in them where maybe they're just not able to get over the line as well. So that is something to consider. But that would roughly be my plan as of now, and we can discuss 37 and 38 in more depth when we get there. And that is all she wrote for this one, ladies and gentlemen. It feels like a while since we had a certain fashion of EYN, the older fashion, but it's back and I thoroughly enjoyed it. If you did as well, then do drop a like on the video and equally subscribe to the channel. If you have not already, remember the good karma will follow in suit. And that is all that really needs to be said for this particular video. I shall see you tomorrow or today, depending on when you're watching this for team selection. And in the meantime, have a wonderful day. Goodbye.